Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition, and today we're continuing our reading of The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, a second look at the Federal Reserve. All right. And this will be chapter 17. This is part two. So I was inspired to read this book because finance and money is such an integral part of our life. And I think it's important to understand how it works, its history, so that we don't get, so that it doesn't control us. So that's my premise. All right, so um, I'm going to move that camera in a little bit. If you're enjoying the book club, check out our other book clubs. We have the spiritual book clubs on Mondays and then health book clubs on Wednesdays. We have a monthly newsletter that we put out, so you could check that out on our website, as well as podcasts where I interview very interesting people in their life journey and how they get to where they are and all that good stuff. So check that out on our website as well. If you want to support us, check out our merch. And if you're in the LA area, Los Angeles area, come and visit us in person in our healing center. We use technologies that's based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing. So you could check that out as well. It's called the Energy Enhancement System, and you can read all about it on our website. So check that out. And check out our YouTube channel. Okay, so that's enough for that. All right, let's do it. This is part two of chapter 17. Riddle's control over Congress. As commanding general of the pro-bank forces, Biddle, sorry, I think I said Riddle. Not even close. Biddle had one powerful advantage over his adversary. For all practical purposes, Congress was in his pocket. Or more accurately, the product of his generosity was in the pockets of Congressmen. Following the Rothschild formula, Biddle had been careful to reward compliant politicians with success in the business world. Few of them were willing to bite the hand that fed them. Even the great Senator Daniel Webster found himself kneeling at Biddle's throne. Galbraith says, Biddle was not without resources. In keeping with his belief that banking was the ultimate source of power, he had he had regularly, I burped. Sorry about that. He had regularly advanced um, funds to members of Congress when delay on appropriation bills had held up their pay. Daniel Webster was, at various times, a director of the bank and a retainer as its counsel. Quote, I believe my retainer has not been renewed or refreshed as usual. If it be wished that my relation to the bank should be continued, it may be well to send me the usual retainers. Unquote. Numerous other men of distinction had been accommodated, including members of the press. And that was from Galbraith, page 80. So the press has been in cahoots with the Congress for a very long time, huh? Hmm. Webster is a particularly interesting study in how even so-called great men can be compromised by an addiction to wealth. He had always been an advocate of sound money in Congress, yet as a lawyer on Biddle's payroll, he represented the bank's position before the Supreme Court in McCullough versus Maryland. Much of the twisted logic that allowed the court to end run the Constitution and destroy sound money came from his pen. After Jackson's veto of the bank's charter, Biddle requested Webster to deliver speeches specifically for the purpose of having the bank reprint them for mass distribution. In one of those speeches, Webster echoed the old refrain that the bank served as a moderating influence on the nation's other banks, and then piously proclaimed, Congress alone can uh, Congress can alone coin money. No state, nor even Congress itself, can make anything a tender but gold and silver in the payment of debts. That was from Cruz, page 2. In an act of astounding hypocrisy, this speech was distributed widely by the very institution that was, oops, designed specifically for creating fractional fiat money without gold or silver backing, to function as tender in the payment of debts. Then, as now, most people did not discern between words and actions and believed that this speech, delivered by such a great man, was evidence of the bank's worthiness. Biddle even distributed 300,000 copies of Jackson's veto message, apparently in the belief that many would not read it. Obviously, if the bank thought it was so bad as to distribute it, it must be bad. And that was from Ramini Life, page 234. The power of the bank's money was everywhere. It was, as John Randolph, the fiery old Republican from Virginia, had said, quote, every man you meet in this house or out of it, with some rare exceptions, which only serve to prove the rule, is either a stockholder, a president, cashier, clerk, or doorkeeper, runner, engraver, papermaker, or mechanic in some other way to a bank. And that was from Annals of Congress, 14 Congress, 11, first session, page 1066, 1110, FF. I don't know what FF stands for. Anyways, if anyone knows, put it in the comment section below. Interesting. Okay, Jackson appeals directly to the voters. Congress, the banks, speculators, industrialists, and segments of the press. These were the forces commanded by Biddle. But Jackson had a secret weapon, which had never been used before in American politics. That weapon was a direct appeal to the electorate. He took his message on the campaign trail and delivered it in words well chosen to make a lasting impression on the voter. His words he spoke out against a moneyed aristocracy which had invaded the halls of Congress, impaired the morals of the people, threatened their liberty, and subverted the electoral process. The bank, he said, was a hydra-headed monster, eating the flesh of the common man. He swore to do battle with the monster and slay it or be slain by it. He bellowed his position to every crowd he could reach. Bank and no Jackson, or no bank and Jackson. That was from Robert Remini, Andrew Jackson, in the Course of American Freedom, 1822 to 1832. New York Harper and Row, 1981, page 373. On the subject of paper money, the president was equally emphatic. His biographer describes the campaign. On his homeward journey, he reportedly paid all his expenses in gold. No more paper money, you see, fellow citizens, he remarked with each gold payment. If I can only put down this Nicholas Biddle and his monster bank. Gold, hardly the popular medium of exchange, was held up to the people as the safe and sound currency which Jackson and his administration hoped to restore to regular use. Unlike paper money, gold represented real value and true worth. It was the coin of honest men. Rag money, on the other hand, was the instrument of banks and swindlers to corrupt and cheat an innocent and virtuous public. And that was from Rimini, Life, page 234 and 235. Jackson had awakened the indignation of the American people. When the November ballots were cast, he received a mammoth vote of confidence. He received 55% of the popular vote, with 37% for Clay, 8% for Wirt, and 80% of the vote in the Electoral College. But the war still was not over. Jackson won the election, but the bank had 4 more years to operate, and it intended to use those years to sway public sentiment back to its support. The biggest battles were yet to come. Jackson removes federal deposits. Jackson did not wait to act. He knew that time would be used as a weapon against him. Quote, "The hydra of corruption is only scorched, not dead," he said. End quote. And that was from Ramini, course, page 52. Soon after the election, he ordered Secretary of the Treasury, William Duane, to place all new deposits of the federal government into various state banks around the country and to pay current expenses out of the funds still held by the Bank of the United States until that account was drained to zero. Without the use of federal money, surely the monster would perish. To Jackson's chagrin, however, Duane balked at that order out of a sincere conviction that to do so would be disruptive to the economy. This was not the first time a cabinet officer and a president had come to disagreement. In the past, however, the impasse had always been resolved by the resignation of the secretary. This time was different. Duane refused to resign, and that raised an interesting constitutional question. A president could appoint a member of the executive branch only with the consent of the Senate. The Constitution was silent, however, on the matter of dismissal. Did that too require Senate approval? The implication was that it did, but the issue had never been tested. Jackson had no patience for such theoretical questions. The letter arrived promptly on Duane's desk. Your further services as Secretary of the Treasury are no longer required. And that was from William J. Duane, Narrative and Correspondence Concerning the Removal of the Deposits and Occurrences Connected Therewith. Philadelphia, NP 1838, page 101 to 103. Quoted by Remini, Life, page 264. Jackson felt that he finally had the monster. Oh, sorry. Uh, skipped a sentence there. On October 1st, yeah, on October 1st, 1833, federal deposits began to move out of the bank. Jackson felt that he finally had the monster firmly within his grasp. I have a change, he said. That quote was quoted by Herman J. Viola, Andrew Jackson, New York, Chelsea House, 1986, page 88. With gleeful confidence, he added, I am ready with the screws to draw every tooth and then the stumps. If I'm not mistaken, he went on, we will have Mr. Biddle and his bank as quiet and harmless as a lamb in 6 weeks. A letter from Jackson to Van Buren, November 19, 1833, Van Buren Papers, Library of Congress, quoted by Rimini, Life, page 264. Excuse me. Biddle deliberately creates monetary chaos. The president's view of the bank's meek captivity was premature, to say the least. Biddle responded not like a lamb, but more like a wounded lion. His plan was to rapidly contract the nation's money supply and create another panic depression similar to the one the bank had created 13 years earlier. This then could be blamed on Jackson's withdrawal of federal deposits, and the resulting backlash surely would cause Congress to override the president's veto. Remini tells us Biddle counterattacked. He initiated a general curtailment of loans throughout the entire banking system. It marked the beginning of a bone-crushing struggle between a powerful financier and a determined and equally powerful politician. Biddle understood what he was about. He knew that if he brought enough pressure and agony to the money market, only then could he force the president to restore the deposits. He almost gloated. quote, this worthy president thinks that because he has scalped Indians and imprisoned judges, he is to have his way with the bank. He is mistaken. And that quote was from Rimini Life, page 265. The ties of party allegiance can only be broken, he declared, by the actual conviction of existing distress in the community. And such distress, of course, would eventually put everything to rights. Nothing but widespread suffering will produce any effect on Congress. It's interesting, just a side note, that Biddle is willing to put the people in jeopardy and make the people suffer in order to get what he wants. That's an abuse of power because he's not thinking of the people. He's thinking of his own political power grab. Interesting, eh? That's the ego uh at work. Interesting. It's just a thought that came to me. Anyway, sorry about that. It's a little squirrel there. Where am I? Okay, I think I'm here. Our only safety is in pursuing a steady course of firm restriction, and I have no doubt that such a course will ultimately lead to restoration of the currency and the recharter of the bank. And that quote was from Rimini, Democracy, page 111. My own course is decided. All other banks and all the merchants may break, but the Bank of the United States shall not break. And that quote was from Biddle to William Appleton, January 27, 1834, and to J.G. Watmo, February 8th, 1934. Nicholas Biddle, correspondence 1807 to 1844. Reginald C. McGrain, editor. New York, Houghton Mifflin, 1919, page 219 and 221. Biddle therefore decided to use the American people as sacrificial pawns in the giant chess match for the bank's survival. The resulting economic chaos is not difficult to imagine. Biddle's contraction of the money supply was executed at a particularly vulnerable moment. Business had been expanding as a result of the bank's prior easy credit and now was dependent on it. Another side note, this also shows how dependent the people are to the banking system, right? So if we have something, if the people are educated enough to have a banking system out that is outside the banking system, then the people won't be beholden to the whims of the bankers, right? So let's say if the people have gold and silver or some money on the side or something like that, then if the banks collapse or if they deliberately collapse the bank, then, the people have a backup plan. Backup plan, that's what you need. A backup plan. And then a backup plan to a backup plan, and a backup plan to a backup plan to a backup plan. In that way, whatever happens to the bank, the people are not suffering, right? Because they have a backup plan. Anyways, that's just a little thought there I had. Excuse me. I'm at the tail end of my I guess you could call it laryngitis or whatever. So forgive me if my voice sounds a little off. Anyways, where was I? Um, okay, here. Also, the tariff came due at precisely this time, placing still more demand for cash and credit. Losses were sustained everywhere. Wages and prices sagged. Men were put out of work. Companies went bankrupt. By the time Congress reconvened in December, it was what was called the panic session. The nation was in an uproar. Newspapers editorialized with alarm, and letters of angry protest flooded into Washington. As the pressure continued to build in Congress, it began to look as though Biddle's plan would work. In the public eye, it was Jackson who was solely responsible for the nation's woes. It was his arrogant removal of Secretary Drain. It was his foolish insistence on removing the deposits. It was his obstinate opposition to Congress. Jackson is censured by the Senate. For 100 days, a phalanx of orders daily excoriated the president for his arrogant and harmful conduct. At length, a resolution of censure was introduced into the Senate, and on March 28, 1834, it was passed by a vote of 26 to 20. This was the first time that a president had ever been censured by Congress, and it was a savage blow to Jackson's pride. Biddle at last had the upper hand. The president rumbled around the White House in a fit of rage. "You are the den of vipers," he said to a delegation of the bank's supporters. "I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out." And that was quoted by Viola. Oh, sorry. Quoted by Viola, page 86. The censure was by no means indicative of popular sentiment. Even in the Senate, which was a hotbed of pro-bank support, a swing of only 3 votes would have defeated the measure. During all this time, imperceptibly at first, but quickly growing, the public had been learning the truth. Jackson, of course, was doing everything within his power to hasten the process, but other factors also were at work, not the least of which was Biddle himself. So large was his ego that he could not keep from boasting in public about his plan to deliberately disrupt the economy. People heard these boasts and they believed him. The turning point came when Governor George Wolfe of Pennsylvania, the bank's home state, came out publicly with a strong denunciation of both the bank and Biddle. This was like the starting bell at the horse race. With the bank's home state turned against it, there was no one left to defend it. And literally within days, the mood of the country and of Congress changed. The Democrats wasted no time consolidating these unexpected gains. To test their strength on the issue, on April 4th, 1834, they called for a vote in the House on a series of resolutions which were aimed at nullifying the censure in the Senate. In essence, the resolution stated that the House totally approved the president's bank policy. The first resolution, passed by a vote of 134 to 82, declared that the Bank of the United States, quote, ought not to be rechartered, end quote. The second, passed by a vote of 118 to 103, agreed that the deposits, quote, ought not to be restored. And the third, passed by an overwhelming vote of 175 to 42, called for the establishment of a special committee of Congress to investigate whether the bank had deliberately instigated the current economic crisis. It was an overwhelming victory for Jackson, which would be culminated a few years later with the passage of a resolution in the Senate, which formally rescinded the previous vote of censure. Biddle defies Congress. Excuse me. When the investigating committee arrived at the bank's doors in Philadelphia, armed with a subpoena to examine the books, Biddle flatly refused, nor would he allow inspection of correspondence with congressmen relating to their personal loans and advances. And he steadfastly refused to testify before the committee back in Washington. For lesser mortals, such action would have resulted in citations of contempt of Congress and would have carried stiff fines for imprisonment, but not for Nicholas Biddle. Rimini explains. The committeemen demanded a citation for contempt, but many Southern Democrats opposed this extreme action and refused to cooperate. As Biddle bemusedly observed, it would be ironic if he went to prison by, quote, went to prison, quote, by the votes of Congress, of members of Congress, because I would not give up to their enemies their confidential letters, end quote. Although Biddle escaped a contempt citation, his outrageous defiance of the House only condemned him still further in the eyes of the American public. And that quote was from Rimini, Life, page 274. The bank was still alive, but had been mortally wounded. By this time, Jackson had completely paid off the national debt incurred by the War of 1812 and had even run up a surplus. In fact, he ordered the Treasury to give back to the states more than $35 million, which was used for the construction of a wide variety of public works. Interesting side note, we can sort of see this play out again today with President Trump, right? And the quote, deep state. Interesting, eh? And history repeats itself. Okay. With the accomplishments close on the heels of his victory over the bank, the president had earned the undying hatred of monetary scientists, both in America and abroad. It is not surprising, therefore, that on January 30th, 1835, an assassination attempt was made against him. Miraculously, both pistols of the assailant misfired, and Jackson was spared by a quirk of fate. Same thing happened to President Trump, Donald Trump. This was the first such attempt to be made against the life of the President of the United States. The would-be assassin was Richard Lawrence, who either was truly insane or who pretended to be insane to escape harsh punishment. At any rate, Lawrence was found not guilty due to insanity. Of course. And that was from Rimini, Democracy, page 228 and 229. Later, he boasted to friends that he had been in touch with powerful people in Europe who had promised to protect him from punishment should he be caught. And that quote was from Robert J. Donovan, The Assassins, New York, Harper and Brothers, 1952, page 83. The ending to this saga holds no surprises. The bank's charter expired in 1836, and it was restructured as a state bank by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. After a spree of speculation in cotton, lavish advances to the bank's officers, and a suspension of payment in specie, Biddle was arrested and charged with fraud. Although not convicted, he was still undergoing civil litigation when he died. Within 5 years, the establishment was forced to close its doors forever, and America's third experience with central banking came to a close. That's why in 1913 they had to do it in secret, right? Because this was such a public, I don't know what you want to call it, fiasco, disaster, depending on which perspective you're looking at from, right? Seeing it from. Oh, interesting, eh? Some bad mixed in with the good. It is tempting to let the story stop right there and allow Jackson to forever wear the crown of hero and dragon slayer. But a more balanced view of these events leads to the conclusion that the forces of virtue were not without contamination. Jackson represented the position of those who wanted only gold and silver for the nation's money. But this group was not large enough to match the power of the bank. He was joined in that battle by many groups which hated the bank for other, less admirable reasons. State banks and business interests along the expanding frontier, for example, were not the least interested in constitutional money. They wanted just the opposite. They viewed the modest restraints of the federal bank as excessive. With the federal bank out of the way, they anticipated no restraints at all. As we shall see in the following section, it is ironic that this is the group that got what it wanted, not the hard money Jacksonians. One cannot blame Jackson for accepting the support of these groups in his efforts to slay the dragon. In politics, it often is necessary to make temporary alliances with one's opponents to achieve occasional common objectives. But Jackson went further than that, more than any other president before him, and rivaled by only a few cents. He changed the character of American politics. He led the nation away from the new concept of diffused powers, carefully worked out by the founding fathers, back toward the old world tradition of concentration and monarchy. By strongly challenging the right of the states to secede from the Union, he set into motion a concept not only would lead to civil war, but which, oh, excuse me, I'm just burping away here. He set into motion a concept that not only would lead to civil war, but which would put an end forever to the ability of the states to check the expanding power of the federal government. No longer was the Union to be based on the principle of consent of the governed. It was now to be based on force of arms. And through the manipulation of voter passion on the bank issue, he charged the perception of the role of president from public servant to national leader. At the height of the battle against the bank, when Jackson was making a direct appeal to the voters for support, he declared, "The president is the direct representative of the people. To fully comprehend the significance of that statement, it must be remembered that the plan of the Constitution was for the president to be elected indirectly by the state legislators, not by the voters at large." Excuse me. After fighting a war to throw off the rule of King George III, the founding fathers wanted nothing more to do with kings of any kind, and they went out of their way to make sure that the president of the United States would never be looked upon as such. They realized that an elected ruler, unless his power is carefully limited and diffused, can become just as despotic as an unelected one. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, therefore, established an electoral college to select the president. Members of the college are to be appointed by the states. Congressmen, senators, or other officers of the federal government are specifically and wisely excluded. The college is supposed to select a president strictly on the basis of his integrity and executive ability, not his party label, political connections, good looks, charisma, or stirring orations. The people may elect their congressman, but the electoral college chooses the president. Thus, it was intended that the president would have a different constituency from Congress, and this difference was important to ensure the balance of power that the framers of the Constitution worked so hard to create. As a means of keeping government under control, it was a truly brilliant piece of political engineering. All of that was changed in the election of 1832. One of the sad facts of history is that good causes often are the occasion for establishing bad precedents. Jackson's fight against the Bank of the United States was one of those events. Summary: the government had encouraged widespread banking fraud during the War of 1812 as an expedient for paying its bills, and this had left the nation in monetary chaos. At the end of the war, instead of allowing the fraudulent banks to fall and letting the free market heal the damage, Congress decided to protect the banks, to organize the fraud, and to perpetuate the losses. Excuse me. It did this by creating the nation's third central bank, called the Second Bank of the United States. The new bank was almost an exact carbon copy of the previous one. It was authorized to create money for the federal government and to regulate state banks. It influenced larger amounts of capital and was better organized across state lines than the old bank. Consequently, its policies had a greater impact on the creation and extinguishing of the nation's money supply. For the first time in our history, the effects began to ricochet again across the entire country at once instead of being confined to geographical regions. The age of the boom-bust cycle had at last arrived in America. In 1820, public opinion began to swing back in favor of the sound money principles espoused by the Jeffersonian Republicans. But since the Republican Party had by then abandoned those principles, a new coalition was formed, headed by Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson, called the Democratic Party. One of its primary platforms was the abolishment of the bank. After Jackson was elected in 1828, he began in full earnest to bring that about. The head of the bank was a formidable adversary by the name of Nicholas Biddle. Biddle not only possessed great personal abilities, but many members of Congress were indebted to him for business favors. Consequently, the bank had many political friends. As Jackson's first term of office neared its end, Biddle asked Congress for an early renewal of the bank's charter, hoping that Jackson would not risk controversy in a re-election year. The bill was easily passed, but Jackson accepted the challenge and vetoed the measure. Thus, a battle over the bank's future became the primary presidential campaign issue. Jackson was reelected by a large margin, and one of his first acts was to remove federal deposits from the bank and place them into private regional banks. Biddle counterattacked by contracting credit and calling in loans. This was calculated to shrink the money supply and trigger a national panic depression, which it did. He publicly blamed the downturn on Jackson's removal of deposits. The plan had almost worked. Biddle's political allies succeeded in having Jackson officially censured in the Senate. However, when the truth about Biddle's strategy finally leaked out, it backfired against him. He was called before a special congressional investigative committee to explain his actions. The censure against Jackson was rescinded, and the nation's third central bank passed into oblivion. Wow, such drama. It's called the political drama, right? All right, that's the end of chapter 17. Oh, that's very interesting. History is very interesting. And the idea is if you learn from history, you won't make the same mistake. At least that's theory anyways. I don't know. People are, humanity's pretty hard-headed, I think. Sometimes we have to be hit with a 4x4 a few times before we kind of wake up. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. We will continue our reading next week. And in the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day, great night, great week, wherever you are. All right, bye-bye now.